Welcome back. My next guest is our very own Luke Jones, always doing great things for Baltimore Positive WNST 1570 AM. Luke, welcome in.
Dennis, how are you, my friend? Happy New Year to you.
I'm doing well, my friend. Happy New Year to you and yours as well. Lots to talk about, of course, beginning with the unfortunate incident between the Bengals and the Bills Monday night.
Yeah, just even a few days later, it's one of those things where I think it's still difficult to process it. We're getting back into talking about the games again,
Yeah,
and we knew we would, and that's okay. But this is still, with the situation with Damar Hamlin still in critical condition. The indications are he's making improvements, so you love seeing that. You continue to pray for him and his loved ones, but in the meantime, it's led to this very strange situation for the NFL. And again, his health and what happened there remains paramount here. We can't say that
of
enough, and we'll
course,
continue to say that.
of
But
course.
in terms of trying to sort out what Week 18 looks like, what it means specifically for the Cincinnati Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens as they meet on Sunday at 1 o'clock, as we did get the official word on what the kickoff time would be. After that was even in flux for the last day or so after what had happened Monday night. But not really knowing what exactly is at stake here. I think, based on the indications as of late Wednesday night, it sounds like the Bills Bengals game isn't going to be replayed, and the league's going to just try to go off of win percentage. So I think if you're any team involved here, whether you're going to benefit or you're going to be, I don't even want to say gypped because again, let's keep in mind what the big picture here is. But if you're going to be on the short end of the stick in terms of playoff ramifications and all that, in the case of the Ravens, it would be they're officially eliminated from AFC North, the AFC North championship picture. I think everyone needs to have as much grace as possible here. I think it's very easy to beat up the NFL for a lot of reasons, and rightfully so, a lot of reasons. And I've been someone who's done that for a lot of things, but this is such an unprecedented situation, and I get it. This, the tragedy struck the NFL 50 years ago in a game,
Yeah.
but it's an entirely different sport, operation, business than it was in the early 1970s. But I just keep coming back to you just have to you deal with whatever comes your way. And I think Calais Campbell and John Harbaugh said this on Wednesday, in terms of not knowing if they still have a path to the AFC North Championship. They just kind of said, we'd like to know one way or the other, but we'll deal with it any way we can. And I'll keep coming back to, look, if it comes down to it, the Bengals play, one less game, and you can say, well, what if they had lost to the Bills on Monday night and the Ravens would have a chance on Sunday? But I don't know, Dennis. We're talking about a team that's 10-6 and had five different games in which they led in the second half that they lost. Even go as recently as Sunday night against the
Yep.
Steelers and what happened there. I just have a tough time feeling too sorry for the Ravens again when you recognize the big picture here and understand what caused this predicament. We talked about this even with COVID, the last couple years with some of the weird things that had to happen. My goodness, the Ravens were right in the middle of getting ready to have a Thursday night game, and they had a COVID breakout that forced it to be pushed to a Wednesday afternoon. And we talked about it through that. And this is, even more dire and serious than that was in terms of how the NFL is directly impacted with Damar Hamlin here. So, I think you just have to accept whatever the NFL decides here, and you move forward. You're going to be in the playoffs. And I think as we're seeing Lamar Jackson not be on the practice field at the beginning of the practice week, and again, we'll see if anything changes on that front, but doesn't feel great as far as his status for week 18 anyway. I think you really come back to probably what the Ravens need to do, what's best for them in terms of giving themselves the absolute best chance in the first round of the playoffs is probably to rest some of your key guys and try to keep as many of your key players as healthy as possible and hope Lamar Jackson's out there wild card weekend. I don't know that. Like anyone else, the longer this goes on, the clock ticks louder in terms of how much time he has to get ready. He's now been out more than a month. So, I think we all need to be realistic on that front. But For me, any arguments about, well, you'd rather have the 5 seed than the 6 seed, or you'd like to build some momentum. If Lamar Jackson's not out there for Sunday's game, then, I think those arguments, to me, they don't carry as much water. And especially if you're talking about not having any mathematical path to the AFC North on top of that, I think probably what I would do is kind of shut things down a little bit in that way, get some of my young guys some play. I might even play Anthony Brown, considering Tyler Huntley's banged up. And if Tyler Huntley is going to have to be the guy for the wild card weekend, you'd like his arm to be as fresh as possible, because we know he's been dealing with that shoulder. So just a very strange set of circumstances, Dennis. But again, it's to come back to recognizing what happened with Damar Hamlin, a young man fighting for his life, still, as you and I are talking, and understanding the big picture here. And I think everyone, even teams that are getting the short end of the stick, from a football standpoint, from a seeding standpoint, to try to have as much grace as possible here and understand that there's bigger things going on than football right now.
Yeah, Luke, I heard an interview that Joe Burrow gave the other day, and he said that he's ready to play, but not all of his teammates are. And I think that's another important piece. And I would think Josh Allen of the Bills would make the same similar commentary, that these two teams that were on the field that night were greatly affected, and not all players from those teams that were actually there, their heads are going to be right this weekend.
Yeah, and that's where I struggle with notions of potentially making that game up, even if you push back the playoffs a week. I think it's such a difficult dynamic for these two teams, more specifically the Bills, but even the Bengals, that you're going to reconvene in week 19. Let's just say hypothetically that's what the league would decide to do. And that's going to be on national television, and it's going to be the same field, same, I mean, so much of that is just so raw and so fresh right now, that I think that's a lot to put those players in that position, strictly in the name of, oh, well, we've got to maintain the sanctity of the schedule, right? I mean, do we really need to in this circumstance? That's where I kind of struggle with that. I mean, if these teams end up meeting in the divisional round or the AFC Championship, and that's just how football plays out, that's how the playoffs play out, that's a different animal. But, to put these guys under the microscope so quickly after what transpired on Monday night, to do that, what would it be, 2 weeks later, less than 2 weeks later, and for that to be what the entire country, even parts of the world are watching in the aftermath of what happened, that's where I kind of look at it and say, do we absolutely have to make up that game? I mean, and that's where, again, I get it. And it's not just the Ravens with the AFC North. I mean, the Bills, Bengals, the Chiefs, I mean, they were all jockeying for the number one seed. But again, we keep coming back to understanding the circumstances at work here. And whatever you decide, there's not going to be a perfect solution. I mean, people have talked about starting the NFC wildcard round a week earlier and bumping back the AFC wildcard round. And, I think it's a creative idea, but then you get to the end of the playoffs and you say, well, the NFC team is going to have an extra week off compared to the AFC team for the Super Bowl. And I kind of look at that and I say, well, if there's going to be a disadvantage, I don't know if I want it for the Super Bowl as much as maybe the wild card round for, or one or two teams get gypped out of seeding, whatever. So again, there's just so much at work here. And as you just mentioned, I mean, Joe Burrow made those comments, and, I think ultimately, I think these teams, it appears that they're going to play, in terms of week 18. I mean, I know the league has, not completely dismissed the notion of the Bills game being postponed if it had to come to that, but it sounds like they're practicing. It sounds like Damar Hamlin's father Tuesday or Wednesday was able to speak to the Bills team via a Zoom or a Skype or whatever it was. And I think, that probably helped those guys a lot. I mean, it's very raw. And look, I think one thing we talk about a lot, and it's really, it's both a credit and a curse to players and coaches, is they are creatures of habit. I think so many of them are just programmed to, move on to the next play, move on to the next game, move on to the next practice, move on to the next meeting, because that's what they do. Look, they all signed up for it, and they're all compensated very handsomely for that. We understand that, but at the end of the day, they're still human beings. And to witness what we all witnessed, and for them to be there firsthand, those guys that were on the field. I mean, look at someone like T. Higgins who delivered the hit to Hamlin's chest. I mean, a hit that we see dozens of times every NFL Sunday, and we don't think twice about it. It wasn't anything malicious or anything that looked overly,
Yep.
over the top violent or anything, dirty or anything like that. I mean, it, but it's, that's very raw. And I think it's something that these guys will get through. And if a few players decide they at some point that they don't want to play anymore as a result, and I know, Calais Campbell was just asked about this in the locker room. He said he'd respect anyone. In the same way we've seen players retire early because of concerns about head injuries, things of that nature. It's a brutal game. We understand that. This is a very extreme example of that we haven't seen in the NFL in a very, very long time, to this degree. So, there's all of that at work. But yeah, you just said it. I mean, the Bengals they'll show up and they'll play on Sunday. Barring something unforeseen at this point in time. And again, Damar Hamlin's health remains paramount here. But yeah, I can't imagine these guys, at least that first play when they go out there, or maybe that first play that we see on Saturday, with the two games on Saturday, the first game on Saturday, late afternoon. No, I can't imagine that there aren't going to be some people kind of holding their breath a little bit to make sure that, okay, everything seems okay. And a tackle's made, blocks are made, hits are made, and then guys get up and they're okay and they go back to the huddle. That's not to be insensitive to Damar Hamlin whatsoever. It's just, to kind of see that, it's still football, and guys are still going to play, and they are going to move on as best they can. So, from that standpoint, yeah, I mean, I that's what I keep coming back to in terms of then, that any plans to make up the Bills Bengals game where, that would be the only show in town, right? And that would just feel like a lot to put those guys through. Again, if they end up meeting in the divisional round, they end up meeting in the AFC Championship, then that's how the playoffs played out. And that will obviously, it's going to be a huge story for especially the Bills, but even the Bengals to a lesser degree, for the rest of this season. And who knows how long after that. But I think, again, the NFL is trying to decide the path of least resistance. And, it appears that it's going to be that they don't replay that game and they're just going to kind of let the schedule fall as it may, with some teams having played 17 games and some teams having, two teams having played 16 games. And I think everyone will just have to live with that. And again, as I said, I think as much grace as possible needs to be shown here for all parties, because, this is something that no one could predict. And the only thing I would say is thank goodness. Say what you want about the league's timing of postponing the game and, whether they were planning to resume or not. There's been lots of discourse there, but thank goodness the protocols in place for the medical personnel to respond in the way that they did. I mean, they're the ones we should really be focusing on in terms of, not so much criticizing other parties, but really praising those individuals and crediting the NFL for having that kind of personnel ready and prepared to act at a moment's notice in a way that almost certainly saved Damar Hamlin's life.
Look, I flash back to, it had to be, I don't know, August maybe of 78, 79. I was 14, 15 years old. Preseason game, Oakland Raiders, New England Patriots. Darryl Stingley, 26-year-old wide receiver, stretched out for pass. Oakland had a pair of hard-hitting safeties, Jack Tatum, George Atkinson, and Tatum just laid him out.
Yeah.
And Stingley just laid there on the turf, never moved. And of course, we see that with some frequency in the NFL, but we see the players, they're moving their hands, their feet, so it's not as traumatic. But that was probably the last time I saw something as bad as this. And I was driving home, I was listening to the game on the radio, and I just turned it on. And when I heard that both medical staffs had rushed to the player, immediately I thought, this is not normal. This is not something that's typical. You hear of one medical staff, not both. So I said, what the heck happened? So when I got home, I actually saw the hit, and it was one of those things that you'll never forget. It'll stay with you. It stays with us as fans and analysts, and I imagine, for the players that were there and all the people that were involved, was even that much more traumatic.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, the only thing that I could recall recently that it reminded me of, and this was something that I just happened to come across by chance, it was Christian Eriksen, the Danish soccer player who was playing in the Euros last summer of 2021, because it was, it had been postponed because of COVID. And I'm not a big soccer guy. I wasn't even watching the game. I was just flipping through channels, and I came to it, and you could just see. I think at the studio, they were talking to the talking heads in the studio at the time, and there was just a somber look
Yeah.
to each of them, and I'm like, what happened? And they were talking about it, and Christian Eriksen, you know, has since recovered and even returned to playing, but he had to be resuscitated. I mean, he was in a similar way, had to be, was administered CPR and shocked and all that with his cardiac arrest, and that was about the only thing that came to mind for me that, in recent history. I mean, Dennis, you and I talk about pro wrestling a lot. I mean, I had memories of, Owen
Yeah.
Hart,
Yep.
and I mean, WWF at the time, Vince McMahon at the time, they continued the show,
He did.
which I think of all of Vince McMahon's transgressions, and I say this as a lifelong pro wrestling fan, that's at the top of the list as far as not canceling that show at that moment in time, with Owen Hart, who tragically fell to the ring, with was for people who aren't familiar, was up in the rafters of the arena. I believe it was in Kansas City. I want to say, I think it was Kansas City, and was a blue blazer, and was to be lowered, with a harness, as part of an entrance, a stunt, and it went horribly wrong, obviously. So I just thought of that in terms of
Sure.
when something like this happens, not to make any assumptions as far as, Damar Hamlin's fate or anything like that, but just at the end of the day, they're all entertainers. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, we talk about this all the time. If no one wants to pay to watch, or to go to games, or sponsors don't want to pay to, to have advertising on the games, there's no value to what any of those guys are doing from, just playing a game. They could be doing it in front of nobody, and there would be no value to it. They're entertainers. So that's where it's important to have the proper perspective of when something like this happens, where a man's mortality is in question. Life or death is in question here. You mentioned Daryl Stingley, or I think of Mike Utley, or I think of Dennis Bird, or Ryan Shazier more recently. These are all situations where players and teammates are shaken up enough under those circumstances and are asked to continue. But in those cases, you at least know that the individual is alert and alive, and they've given a thumbs up, or
Sure.
some kind of signal that their vitals are at least stable. When this happens, it's impossible to think about the game, and that's where really credit the two head coaches, Sean McDermott and Zach Taylor, where it's very clear that regardless of any directives from the league or not, and I think there's been a lot of conjecture and assumptions made as far as what exactly happened there. And I'm not going to absolve the league entirely either, but I'm just saying I don't know if any of us truly know enough just yet to make that judgment. But those head coaches, they were leaders of men in that moment. And just like I talked about the emergency responders and the medical staffs of both teams, and the part they played in saving Damar Hamlin's life, and at least giving him a chance to survive here. But those coaches, I think you really saw why they were leaders of men, and how they handled themselves and talked to each other and supported each other, and the players supported each other. I mean, that's what I hope we'll take away from this, more so than what it meant for the AFC
100%.
playoff
Sure.
picture, really, at the end of the day.
No, 100%, Luke. Looking back at the Ravens Sunday night game against the Steelers, great atmosphere, I thought, at the stadium. The fans were into it, and a hard-hitting game, what we come to expect between two teams, two organizations that know each other very well. And a lot of our fans are upset about the loss, and rightfully so. But if Roquan Smith makes a play on that ball that Kenny Pickett threw to Najee Harris, and they stop him, it may be a different narrative. But it was disappointing for the Ravens, particularly after that 56-yard kickoff return by Justin Hill, not to be able to get positive yards and have a chance to not put the game away, but at least give themselves a better chance of staving off the Steelers at the end.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You return a kick to the 40, and how many yards do you need for Justin Tucker to have? I'm not attempting a 60-yard field goal, but him attempting a 53-yard field goal. I mean, you don't need much there. Even if Likely makes the catch on third down, which wouldn't have been a first down, but at least makes it a case where he's probably trying a 52-yard or something like that, which is very makeable under those circumstances. I mean, it's Justin Tucker, for goodness sake. But not only did they not do that, they moved backwards 2 yards. They had to punt from the 42. So on fourth down there, you're looking at a 60-yard field goal, which I wouldn't have tried it in that case either. Just given the score of the game and potentially giving the Steelers the ball at
Sure.
midfield. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it comes down to this. I think it really, both sides of the ball failed at some pretty critical times. I mean, the offense from the time that J.K. Dobbins, keep in mind, they came out in the second half, had a drive, kicked a field goal, get the ball back. J.K. Dobbins, he reels off a 22-yard run. And then from that moment until Mark Andrews catches the pass on the final drive and gives himself up that they got a first down there, they ran 14 plays for 32 yards and committed a turnover and one first down.
Yeah.
I mean,
you're not going to win much with that kind of a
you have
from your
that
offense.
Right. You have that. And then the defense gave up points on 3 of the last 4 drives. And the defense, while I certainly look at the offense and say, my goodness, I mean, you got to do, at least get a few first downs on those last couple drives, before Pittsburgh's touchdown drive. But the defense, they got beat up. They ran all over them. I mean, that was the most rushing yardage the Ravens have allowed since Derrick Henry in the 2000 and the Titans in the 2019 playoff loss. So, yeah, I mean, we can kind of divvy up what percentage of blame goes to offense, defense, coaching, whatever. The answer is kind of yes, right? I mean, every party kind of played a part. I guess the special teams for the most part. We didn't see a meltdown there. Although Jordan Stout had a touchback at one point that would have been nice to pin him deep, but I mean, it happens. But that's where I keep coming back to, if the Ravens, indeed don't have a chance to play for the AFC North, it's like, well, you had your division rival on the, all you had to do was make one stop or get a few first downs in the fourth quarter, and they didn't do it. So that's where I just look at it and say, I get it. I understand. I'm sure it'd be great to see this game be for the AFC North, but again, they would have been eliminated if the Bengals won last Monday night. So, and we never know what would have happened in that game. So, kind of is what it is, and we've been talking about this a lot. I mean, this is, unfortunately, it's been one of the very best 45-minute teams in the NFL, and they've been a pretty lousy fourth quarter team this year. That's just the truth of it. The fourth quarter team, their defensive efficiency in the fourth quarter has been pretty lousy. The fourth quarter offense, at times has been okay, and other times it's kind of been what we saw on Sunday night. And it's why I look at this team right now, and regardless of whether Lamar Jackson makes a return or not, and I have no idea at this point, Dennis. I'd like to tell you that I have this great inside information as someone who prides himself being around the team, but it's just, it's been that weird. Rich Eisen even talked about it this week, going back to the Browns game, which was now going on 3 weeks ago, saying that, presumably John Harbaugh or someone in the organization told him that, Lamar's, he probably could have played this week. I mean, and 3 weeks later, he's still not practicing. So there's clearly a disconnect here. The Ravens can try to hide it as much as they want. Lamar can say nothing, as much as he wants, but it's clear that they're not on the same page. Now, does that mean he's going to show up over the next couple of days and start practicing and playing in the wild card game? Maybe. Or maybe we've seen the last of Lamar Jackson this season, which begs the question of what happens after that. But, it really just, comes back to, at this point, just, I mean, try to get yourself in position to be as healthy as possible for the wild card round. And, the chips will fall where they may for Sunday's game. But, if they're not playing for the division, which it's looking like it's going to be that way, that's where I kind of just come back to, is the juice really worth the squeeze of risking, a substantial injury or two to some guys that are really important to you, if Lamar Jackson's not even going to be out there playing, giving you the best chance to win against the Bengals on Sunday anyway?
No question about that, Luke. The Lamar Jackson situation continues to burn, and we knew this was going to be an issue all season long. When you have a quarterback that's not under contract, it's that cloud in the sky, right? It's a constant reminder he's not under contract, and does he make a business decision? I mean, and I'm not saying in the sense of contractually speaking, but maybe that's what I'm saying. If he's 80% or 85%, does he risk further injury to his knee in the postseason? And does he in his own mindset want to be 100%? But who knows? The silence has been deafening from both sides. We see him wearing his Oakleys on the sideline. At least I'm encouraged that at least he's with a team. He's visible, right? So for all the people that say, well, he's checked out. Well, no, he's still part of the team. I don't buy that. I do think he's a fierce competitor, and I think if anywhere near close to 100%, he'll play. Now, with that said, I was encouraged to see Calais Campbell listed as questionable. It means he's getting better. Marcus Peters was out, and you said it a couple times today that do they rest their players and get them ready for the playoff game, particularly if they have to play the Bengals 2 times in a row?
Yeah, and that's another interesting wrinkle to this, right? I mean, if you're playing the Bengals, and again, we don't know that. We don't know how it's all going to play out. And I mean, there's still, Bengals or what happens with the Bills against the Patriots. I mean, it's still, I mean, what I assume if we're working on the assumption that they don't replay the postponed game,
Mhm.
I guess the Chiefs can seal the top seed with a win on Saturday. So, you assume that happens. I guess you never know for sure. I mean, it's the NFL, but yeah, I mean that's another layer to this that's really interesting. And I mean, you mentioned the Bengals and Joe Burrow's comments. How much are they going to be into it? How much are they going to play in terms of the idea of if they can't get the number one seed, is being the 2 versus the 3 that worth all that much to them, right? I mean, and same with the Ravens, how much is being the 5 versus the 6 worth to them, knowing that it's
Right.
dependent on the Chargers outcome. So, there's just a lot to it. But you just said it. I mean, there's very much a very distinct possibility. I mean, if not the most likely outcome is going to Cincinnati for the wild card round. So from that standpoint, does either team want to show anything
Right.
of meaning there? I mean, as much as I don't have a lot of faith in Greg Roman's vault at this point in time, based on what we've seen with this offense, really going back to, coming out of the bye week, so it's been a long time, even before Lamar Jackson got hurt. But, whatever ideas you might have, you certainly don't want to give those away in the regular season finale and give Cincinnati a chance to adjust to that. So, I think if nothing else, the Ravens need to figure out a way to adjust against that bear front that Pittsburgh was showing them, that 6-man front
Yeah.
that, I mean, my goodness, Dennis, the Steelers were begging the Ravens to throw the ball against them.
Well,
And
if you just do
they,
the simple math, you got 6 down linemen, 2 linebackers, right? 3 defensive backs. I would think that all the receivers had single coverage, including Mark Andrews. I would think.
yeah, well, and we saw Mark Andrews do what he did, but no one else did anything else. I mean, likely caught the touchdown, but we also saw him have a pretty critical drop. And the wide receivers had 2 catches between all of them. So, I mean, we've talked about it. It's a broken passing game. It's broken. I mean, I don't think Lamar Jackson coming back is going to quote fix it. Can it be better? Sure. Do I think it's going to be good enough for this team to make a real run? Not at this point. I'm not believing that. I mean, you never know. But it's funny. I actually went back and found the article that I wrote after the Ravens rested their starters against the Bengals in the 2012 finale. Remember Joe Flacco and Ray Rice? I think they played 1 or 2 series in that game, and then they rested. They rested. A bunch of guys were deactivated. Ray Lewis wasn't back, of course, yet, coming off IR, and they rested Nada. They rested Suggs, and it was funny to read that. Knowing what was going to lie ahead over the next 5 or 6 weeks for the Ravens, but I kind of said at that point, the only variables they can really control in that moment, in that Week 17 game, because they had clinched against the Giants the week before. Keep in mind, this is a team that had lost 3 out of 4 going into that
Yeah.
game, but they had a great performance against the Giants. I mean, they scored points, scored touchdowns. They kind of demolished the Giants. Remember, the Giants were the defending Super Bowl champs who had not had a great year, and they came out and they had that statement win.
Yeah.
I think that made it a lot easier to kind of shut it down for Week 17 then, because it was a similar situation. They couldn't get a bye, but they could have been the 3 seed rather than the 4. But you just kind of look at it and say, is this really worth it if we get Flacco hurt, or we get Ray Rice hurt, or we get Ed Reed hurt, or someone,
Sure.
any other notable players at that point in time. And it was funny just to hear, my tone in that was not overly optimistic about the team's outlook in the playoffs, because hey, they had that was their 4th loss in 5 games to finish the season, even if that last game didn't mean anything. So that's where I kind of look back at it, and I was kind of on the fence. If you had asked me this a day ago, I might have said I think they need to play. But as I started thinking about it more, it's like if Lamar's not out there and he's the key to this thing anyway,
Doesn't matter. It
what
really doesn't.
momentum are you really building here? I mean, we kind of know what this team is. They can run the ball really well, even not quite as well against the Steelers, but it still wasn't, it wasn't a poor day at the office in
It
that way.
wasn't. No.
And their defense is, I don't think it's special, I don't think it's great, but it's good. We know those things. Nothing about Sunday's outcome, meaning this Sunday, not talking wild card round, is going to change your identity in that way. So that's where I kind of look at this thing and say, if indeed there's no path to a division title and a home playoff game, then I don't really see that there's nearly enough juice there to really put your guys at risk. And keep in mind, you can't rest everyone in the NFL. I mean,
Sure.
you have you have 48 guys you can play with on game day, so that means you're resting a Roquan Smith, you're resting a Ronnie Stanley, you're resting a Kevin Zeitler, you're resting those types of, you're resting a J.K. Dobbins almost certainly. I would, especially playing on turf. So I think that's what it looks at, how for me it shapes up to be, and that's where I would even take a long look at Anthony Brown. And hey, there's even another element to this that gives you a chance to evaluate him, because let's face it, I mean, it hasn't gone well with Tyler Huntley, and not to say that putting aside what happens with Lamar Jackson, but let's just say Lamar is back and you're even talking in terms of a backup quarterback. Let me see what Anthony Brown looks like in a, albeit not high stakes setting, but in a real NFL game. And, maybe there's a competition there to be had, regardless of how it all shakes out with number 8. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot going on here, and certainly some circumstances that no one could have foreseen, even on Monday afternoon, going into that Bills-Bengals game.
A lot to unpack there for sure. Luke, please tell our listeners where they can find you on WNST, Baltimore Positive, all your great social media presence, as well as your blog.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke. Check out my blog at BaltimorePositive.com, sponsored by Coons Forward of Baltimore. Latest 12 Ravens thoughts, injury report. I'll have my predictions for Sunday. I have post-game reaction. Any updates in terms of whether we know for certain if the Ravens are going to be playing for the division, or if we find out that it's just for seeding, any of that, you can check out at BaltimorePositive.com. You want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. Any Ravens tangible, direct injury updates, final injury report, game day inactives, any significant local sports news sent directly to your mobile device via the WNST Baltimore Positive text service, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. Any Ravens players and coaches interviews from Owings Mills, check out all of that at BaltimorePositive.com.
All right, my friend, always a pleasure and a privilege having you on. I appreciate your insight and your commentary, and I'm sure we'll have more storylines to talk about a week from now.
Hey, keep in mind, regardless of what happens on Sunday, we'll be talking about a playoff game.
You say playoff?
As lousy as it feels in so many ways, and I get it to a point, but I also, everything that happened Monday night with Damar Hamlin, let's also remember this is a game and it's entertainment, and hey, it could be a lot worse, even looking from a football lens. The Ravens are going to be playing a playoff game here. Don't take that for granted. I'm not anticipating it being a magical 2012 or 2000 like run, but
Absolutely.
You never really know. And we'll see how it plays out and roll the ball out, and let's enjoy, because we may be down to our last 2 Ravens games of the year, and it's a long off season. I know you love the draft. Hey, I like college basketball. I love baseball, but hey, it's a long off season. Let's not wish this away just because there is some understandable frustrations with the current state of the football team.
And you never know what's going to happen. Again, I appreciate it, Luke. Keep doing great things. We'll take a quick break and be back right after this.